Hey guys, so for today's video I'm going to be answering yet another one of your questions. Today's question comes from Butler Raltub, who asks, should we use the Unix way of thinking when purchasing devices? All these smartphones are getting really big now and seem to try and do everything. Should we instead buy a device for each task? Okay, so that's actually a really interesting question, and just before I begin answering it, I'm just going to clarify what the Unix way of thinking is. So, basically the idea of Unix-based operating systems, but it's a philosophy that sort of extends beyond it, is instead of having like a Swiss Army approach to solving problems, instead of trying to develop a solution that does lots of different tasks, to actually find lots of individual smaller solutions that are actually focused on doing one thing, but doing that one thing particularly well. The prime example of that is the idea of either using, say, Google as a service on the internet or using lots of different equivalent services. So, for example, Google has, of course, it has the Google Search, it has Gmail, it has Google Drive, it has Google Calendar, it has Google Sites, so you can develop a website, it has Blogger, and Google offers lots of different services, all at the convenience of just one Google account. Or what you could do is you could use a separate email program for your email. You could use a separate program for your calendar. You could use a separate program for your cloud storage, something like Dropbox. And you could, carry on. Instead of having a service like Google that uses that sort of is a Swiss Army knife of internet utilities, to actually have a separate service for each of those utilities. And an example, a hardware example, for example, is instead of having a smartphone which can be used as your camera or your video camera or an audio recorder or again a calendar, a way of keeping up to date with things, as a phone, as an instant messenger, as in fact maybe even a laptop in a lot of cases. Instead of having a phone that does all these different things, to actually have instead maybe an actual camera, maybe a less fancy mobile phone, a phone that's actually designed to make calls and receive text messages, and that's it. And then maybe have a video camera for when you need it then. Maybe have a map instead of having to rely on Google Maps. And having all these individual things. And there are pros and cons, of course, to each of these approaches, which is why, of course, both of these approaches still exist, simultaneously in the world. Okay, so as a bit of a tangent, one of my not so guilty pleasures is reading the biographies of business people, very successful business people, because I'm always interested in the psychology of people that are driven to succeed in the way that they do, and the diversity between various approaches to solving problems of these very successful business people differs a lot as well. One of the people who I find particularly fascinating is a guy who I think his name is Timothy Ferriss, and he wrote a book called The 4-Hour Workweek, which is actually really good. I highly recommend it. And he is quite well known because he actually managed to get into Harvard University. He secured a place at Harvard University with below average grade point average, and like a below average as in below the national GPA. And he actually managed to blag his way into Harvard. He also managed to win a kickboxing tournament with only 4 weeks of training. And one of the things I like about this guy is that he knows he's mediocre. He knows he's not superhuman, but he knows that if he approaches a problem the right way, that involves finding the path of least resistance, anything can be solved. But more importantly, anything can be solved or achieved easily. And that's like one of the biggest myths in the world, is that the harder you work, the more you'll get out of something. And it's not about that. And that's really quite interesting. But one of the things that he talks about when he talks about using like services for your business and companies that will support your business, is that don't rely too much on either one customer or one supplier of anything. So if your business is say it designs artwork, that's what your business does, and you rely on, say, a big company, say you rely on the government to supply, say you design signs, and the government comes along with a really nice, big, lucrative contract that you just design road signs for the government. If the government decide to take that contract and move it to someone else, your business will fall flat on its face. Whereas if your sign-making business, instead of, say, did one big lucrative contract for the government, actually decided to do smaller contracts for maybe smaller signs for local businesses all around the country, then if one of their customers pulled out or one of their customers decided to use a different service, their business would hardly be affected because they'd have hundreds of different clients to support their business rather than just the big one government, the client that is the government. And so what his approach is always always sort of have as much of a modular system as possible. Have it so that any part of your system can be attacked, can be broken, can fall away, can be cut away, can be can survive a failure because no other part of your business or no other part of your overall structure or process or program, whatever, is affected by it. And that's what sort of draws strength. So, for example, if I have my email from Google, if I have my calendar from Google, if I have my all my services from Google, if I use Google to host my website, if I use Google Drive to host all my files, and then suddenly for one reason or another Google dies tomorrow, Google goes offline tomorrow, that's a whole bunch of services that I can't use. That's so much of my tools just disappeared overnight. Now, of course, that's not likely to happen, but if it does, it would be disastrous. Whereas if I had a various different email supplier, if I used a different calendar, cloud synchronization service, if I used a different service to host my website, any one of those things went down, any one of those companies became bankrupt overnight, that would be one problem that I'd have to solve. Whereas if Google went down overnight, that would be like 12 problems I'd have to solve. Okay, so we're bringing that over to hardware and devices. So if you drop your phone in a river, you've just lost more than a phone. You've lost your phone, you've lost your camera, you've lost your video camera, you quite possibly have lost your diary, your contacts, your calendar. And yeah, you can synchronize those to the cloud, so it's nowhere near as much of a problem as it used to be. But you still have to get a new phone, and that can in and of itself be quite expensive. Whereas if you have a separate phone, or you have a separate phone, you have a separate camera, you have a separate video camera, which presumably you're not going to keep in your pocket all the time, but only when you need it. You have a separate map. It's a lot less likely that all of those things are going to perhaps fall in a river or get damaged or broken all at the same time. So there's that benefit as well. Also, different components of your phone or different components of each of your individual devices will need to be upgraded differently. For example, my stills camera is the same stills camera I've had for the past 4 years, and it still works great. It's 14 megapixel, and for what I use it for, that's more than enough. It comes up with pretty nice clear images, and even though I know that you're up to goodness knows a gajillion megapixels now, you don't need that many, especially if you only take the occasional photograph like I do. It's also a very durable camera, but also if it falls in a river overnight, it's only going to cost me, probably if I wanted to get the same model of camera, like 30 quid. Whereas again, of course, if I drop my mobile phone if I drop my smartphone into a river or down the toilet or whatever, again, I'd have to replace the entire thing, and that could be 400-500 quid. So if I wanted to get a decent one, so there's that. And again, you can upgrade components separately in regards to, say, my video camera. Of course, this video camera that I'm using now, I actually bought it second hand. I actually got a fantastic deal. It was about 150 quid, but it's significantly more than that first hand. If this actually got damaged tomorrow, well, actually, no, that would actually be kind of a problem. I mean, it's insured, so it's not too bad. But at least I'd still be able to make phone calls. At least I'd still be able to have my calendar, my updates. At least I still have the easily and readily available facilities to actually contact people to know that I wouldn't be able to do camera work or whatever for them. And also, I'd actually, yeah, and also this camera is better than the one that comes on phones as well, which is particularly important. And also, actually going back to that, this camera, right, and this microphone here. Now, the sound quality is probably going to be pretty good on this video, because I'm using a proper microphone instead of the onboard camera one, which is notoriously not that great, right? So what I'm going to do with the audio and video on this particular video is I'm actually recording using the camera as such, and the camera has got regular, it's actually taken in my voice as well. This is in fact a microphone that is actually recording my voice directly to an MP3 file on this device. And this is actually one of the safest ways to record it, because first of all, if the audio is messed up either on this microphone or on that camera, I've got a backup audio track, vice versa. That works particularly well. It's also really well because instead of having, say, perhaps either a wired microphone or a wireless microphone, where you can get any amount of problems with interference and things like that, is that it's a simpler solution. It's a more straightforward solution. This microphone has to focus on recording the audio. That camera has to focus on recording the video. And it works like that. It works pretty well. For example, if I decide to complicate the problem by having one device to record video and audio, by having, say, a linked microphone with a cord, yeah, the overall process, when it goes right, might be a little bit easier because I don't have to match up the audio with the video or whatever, but it's still more complicated because there are more potential components to go wrong. I might not necessarily plug the 3.5mm jack from the microphone into the camera correctly, and if I only, and with so many other things you have to think about when setting up, that could easily go wrong. There could be maybe a loose connection in the wire that might happen or might occur only on the day when you need it the most. So the idea is with recording your audio separately, is that although it's an extra step in the process, it actually simplifies the process a lot, because each of these components do one job, but they do one job particularly well. And it's this sort of safety, this idea of safety, this idea of minimizing the number of things that can go wrong, in a way discouraged me from having a smartphone. Because having one device that's particularly expensive, I mean, of course, you can insure your smartphone or whatever, but that's a bit of a drag, because even though this camera is insured, it'd be not a nightmare, but it'd still be a drag to actually have to claim back on it. But yeah, when you've got one component, you can take a bit more of a you can more things can go wrong, more things you can afford more things to go wrong, and that's generally the idea. That's kind of also, again, why I like the Unix way of approaching computer problems, is if something goes wrong, you can switch out one piece of software for another. You can upgrade pieces of software individually, and it all seems to, because these individual pieces of software are simpler and more straightforward than having some kind of Swiss Army device piece of software that aims to try and do everything and interact with so many other different pieces of software, there's more to go wrong. So that's why I personally take the Unix approach when buying hardware, is because it minimizes basically what can go wrong in general. And I'm one of those people that tries to, instead of having easy and straightforward ways of solving problems, to actually have ways of solving problems that are least likely to make things worse as well. That's just one of the things I bear in mind. And again, this is the sort of the line of thinking by people like Timothy Ferriss, who, and if they go with that kind of advice, if that's kind of the lifestyle, not the lifestyle choice, but the way of thinking that they follow, then it can't be disastrous. It can't be that wrong. It can't be that bad. And again, as well, I mean, I have other reasons why I don't use smartphones. I think that smartphones can often make you rely on things that you might not necessarily want to do. I know that a lot of people think, well, I don't necessarily have to rely on the technology that's in my pocket. I can actually perhaps, still learn to navigate my way around a city or whatever, without without, say, having Google Maps in my pocket, and I can perhaps navigate my way around the city, use it without my sat nav, or whatever, or I can perhaps sort of learn to sort of live my life without having to Google every single thing, and Google the solution to every single problem that comes up with my life. But in a lot of cases, I guess, when that solution's in your pocket, it's readily available, it is very, very, very easy for it to become a crutch. And I've seen that happen to a lot of people before. And I guess, to be honest, with me, not having a smartphone just kind of, I don't know, it makes to be honest, it makes life simpler. It makes things a little more straightforward. But then that's just sort of, and also it allows you to sort of rely on, and allows you to learn and develop skills more independently, and it allows you to sort of become more independent and less reliant on those kind of technologies. And as much as I love technology, as much as I love software and how it works and how it brings people together and how it solves problems, one of the things that I really dread is that day when we become so reliant on something that when it's taken away or when it changes too much, that it actually makes our lives considerably worse. And that's one of the things I always try and bear in mind, is that whenever there's a technological solution proposed, does it make something better? Does it solve the problem? And also, does it lock any doors behind us? Does it burn any bridges? Does it actually prevent us from doing anything that we might want to do? Does it stop us from backtracking? Does it paint us into a corner? and various other cliches along those lines. So anyway, that's just a sort of, I guess, my particular thought pattern about it as well, is that keeping things simple, I think, is it's worthwhile, it's important, and again, that's why I guess I take the Unix approach personally. I think it's one worth taking, and I'm certainly not going to say that if someone decides differently that's wrong in any way, because it's different horses for different courses, I guess. But yeah, and again, I use more Google services than I personally would like as well, because Google do offer really good internet utilities. They offer a really good email service. They offer fantastic drive storage. They offer 15 gigabytes of drive storage for free, and that doesn't include docs made in Google Docs, spreadsheets made in Google Spreadsheet, or whatever their program's called, and it doesn't include the Google Docs made in the Google Docs system. It only includes things like the images and the videos and the email attachments. The text in the emails doesn't count towards your 15 gigabyte quota, but just the images that are attached to them does. They give you, and to upgrade it to, like, I think it's like 100 gigabytes is like $3 a month. That's nothing. That's fantastic. Like, Google really do have the inside track on the quality of services they offer. Unfortunately, I think when it comes to things like Google, they are inclined to allow ourselves to paint ourselves into a corner. When we get used to Google offering so many services at such a ridiculously cheap, in fact, more often than not, free rate, we can then kind of become hooked on one company. We can become reliant on one company. The idea that YouTube allows us to upload an infinite amount of videos of an infinite length in high def with no payment whatsoever is mind-boggling. And again, when we sort of allow Google to sort of become that one-stop shop for every single online solution that we have, it locks us out of a lot of other options. It locks us out of things like, well, maybe there are other video services that we could use. Maybe Dailymotion's pretty good, and Dailymotion is pretty good. I've used it. The only problem with Dailymotion is that no one else really uses it. Even though it is consistently within one of the top 100 most visited websites in the world, Dailymotion doesn't tend to favor English-speaking countries for one reason or another. And Vimeo as well. I mean, Vimeo's kind of got its niche market, but it's certainly no YouTube, even though it's a surprisingly successful website. But then again, Vimeo, they have limits on it as well. So I think allowing Google to get as big and as popular as it has kind of in a way made us become reliant on it. I think Google's a fantastic company, and I think they're one of the more ethical tech companies out there as well. However, that being said, it's always a little concerning when these companies go without competition, when these guys perhaps make their products in a way that people become reliant on them as well. But anyway, that's just a few thoughts on it. Thank you very much for that very interesting question. Apologise for rambling on a little bit, but I would be very interested to hear your guys' thoughts on the whole thing as well. If you guys have any more questions you would like me to answer, feel free to leave them down in the comments section below, and I will try and get around to answering pretty much every single one of them so far. I'm on track to actually do it this time, as I have done in all the previous times before. So that's about it from me today. Thank you very much for watching. Until next time, I've been Chris Ware, and you've been awesome. Take care now. So this is just the end slate, just to let you guys know what other kind of projects I'm working on. For those of you that don't know, I have a second channel where I do more informal, casual type stuff. And I also have a gaming channel. So if you guys are into that kind of stuff, you might want to check those out. Also, if you want to ask me any questions or just have a chat about whatever it is that I've been talking about in this video, feel free to check out my Twitter and my Tumblr as well. I spend a fair amount of time on them. Toodaloo.